All right, thank you guys so much for being here. Welcome. I'm Swift Everdy. I'm the co-chair of the Equity Inclusion Advisory Committee here in the town of Putney. We have a number of members here, if you want to raise your hands. And Kurt there, thank you. So we are here, I'm going to officially call this to order because it is a town event. So I'm calling it to order at 6:03. Thank you for being here. So we were originally tasked, our committee was tasked from the town to get some more clarity on how fair and impartial policing works here at the county level, because we don't have local police. Our local police force is the sheriff's department. And when we decided to expand that a little bit by turning this into a public forum, originally it was a conversation that was going to happen kind of casually with the equity committee and the sheriff's department. I'd be like, great, check. You understand fair and impartial policing? We're good. And then it decided to make this a much more public, wider panel, not discussion, but forum, and take more questions and really have this be a wider event to welcome all of you. Because many people don't come to select board meetings or things like that. So and we added food and childcare to get even more of you here. So thank you. We are going to be recording. It's going to be pub broadcast on BCTV. We are going to try and avoid recording the audience if you're sitting in your seat, but if you're at a mic, you will likely be recorded, including this mic here if you come to ask a question. And there are cards that we're going around for questions, and we're going to have open about a half hour at the end for folks to come up and ask your question into the microphone. And we'll be reading some of those cards when we start that last section at the end. And silence your cell phones if you can. And I'll pass it on to Kerry Amidon, who is the Vernon town moderator and blessing us with her capacity to lead a room. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you all for coming. Can you hear me? All right. So again, my name is Kerry Amidon, and I'm going to be facilitating tonight's conversation. So here's what you should expect, along with a few norms. Tonight's agenda, we have 2 hours together. I'm going to try to keep us on track. I may redirect if necessary, but it's only to make sure that as many voices as possible are heard. The first hour and 20 minutes will be structured dialogue with our panelists across 5 topics. We'll try to keep each to about 15 minutes. At about 7:20, we will open the floor to you all for about 30 minutes for your questions. Please, if possible, keep your questions brief, 2 minutes or less, as we'd like to have as many as possible being asked. Feel free to submit them in writing to a volunteer at any point, especially if you prefer not to be identified and volunteers are raising their hand. As stated, the forum is being recorded. Thank you, BCTV. And we will close with some final panelist remarks at about 7:50 and try to wrap up at 8 o'clock. So our norms. We are here in a spirit of dialogue, not debate. Please challenge ideas and policies, but please do not challenge people personally. As stated, silence your phones. Some of what we discuss tonight may be difficult. Those feelings are welcome here. We simply ask that we hold them with care for one another. So thank you for being here, and let's begin. I'd like to welcome our panelists. If I could ask you each, perhaps we start with Sheriff Anderson. Could you share your name, your role, how long you've been serving this community, and a little bit about what drew you to this work?
Happy to, thank you. My name is Mark Anderson, and I'm the Sheriff of Windham County. I've been Sheriff since 2019. I was originally appointed by the Governor to fulfill the remainder of a term. I was elected in 2022 and have been doing that for the last few years. I've been with the Sheriff's Office since 2004, and what got me there is I completely had no plan. So any kids looking to graduate, they don't have a plan, give me a call, we're hiring. But on a serious note, I came from a family of helpers. I knew I wanted to do something with helping. And I was not ready to go to college. And so what I did was found a job that was helping and fell in love with it and learned so much more. And here we are.
Next.
Yes, my name is Cliff Wood, and I live in Westminster, and we moved to Vermont full-time in 2017 from New York. I was in higher education for 50 years, working in public community colleges in large urban areas, so I've always been involved in criminal justice, police science programs, and concerned about how our police were trained. When I came here, I became involved with the Windham County NAACP, and when Mark established his advisory committee 5 years ago?
5 years.
5 years ago, I was the NAACP representative, and I really enjoyed it, and I wouldn't give it up, and they didn't take it from me, so I have stayed there these 5 years. And I've noticed I'm the only one without a phone. It must be a generational thing. Do I need to get my phone out?
Senator?
Okay, great. Hi, everybody. My name is Nader Hashim. I'm one of the senators for Windham County, and I've been serving this community in some capacity since 2011. Between 2011 and 2019, I was a state trooper out of the Brattleboro barracks and the Westminster barracks. Around 2019, I decided to make the jump into politics and also to become an attorney. And so my job outside of the legislature is as a defense attorney, spending time giving law enforcement a hard time. Joking aside, that's what takes up the bulk of my time, serving as a senator, as the chair of the Senate Judiciary, where we deal a lot with the topics that we're going to be talking about tonight. And just the underlying concepts of treating people with basic dignity and respect, some of the underlying concepts when it comes to fair and impartial policing, that's a lot of the reason as to why I went into law enforcement in the first place, and why I went into politics, and why I ended up becoming an attorney. So I'm looking forward to the conversation tonight. Thank you.
Sergeant?
I am Tyler Noyes. I'm a sergeant out of the Westminster Barracks of the State Police. I've been at the barracks my entire career at the State Police since 2017. I've only been in Westminster. I had some different roles, but I've since become a night shift sergeant 2 years ago. What really drew me to this work, I too come from a family of service, grandparents, siblings in the military. I went to Norwich University, didn't go the military path, but I did fall in love with Vermont. Wanted to stay here and continue that service, and luckily the State Police called, and I've had the privilege to be here and serve the community ever since.
Thank you. We're going to start with Sheriff Anderson before we dive into the real questions. But you just got legislation passed that allows for a regional policing pilot. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Could you give us a very brief 2 minutes or so overview of the pilot and what it means for policing in our community?
So first and foremost, I have to thank Senator Hashim, who was one of the sponsors of the bill, along with Senator Harrison. The project is not my idea, really. It is the culmination of research of 60 years worth of studies on how do we currently provide law enforcement services to the community and how we can do it better. And so as I approached the towns of Windham County saying, what do you want me to do as your sheriff? And then it was kind of that open-ended. We started coming up with if we could regionalize, if we could close gaps in where no service exists, and if we could eliminate duplicity, places where we have 3 people providing the same service, that would be helpful. And so what we came up with is this model that works with towns that want to share services with each other to come together, raise funds for the services, to work with my office to deliver the service. I think that's the shortest version I can give, and I'll give a 3-hour speech after this meeting if you were interested.
Thank you. So diving into our first question, and whoever would like to take this may. Vermont's fair and impartial policing policy was significantly updated in 2024. Could someone give us a brief overview of the policy, what it requires of law enforcement officers and their supervisors, and how it shapes police interactions with all members of our community, including immigrant residents?
I could start, if that's all right. So the fair and impartial policing policy is in some ways, a constantly evolving concept in the legislature, and there are oftentimes different pushes to try and change it. Generally, what it has to do with is creating a model policy that all agencies are expected to follow. They can make some modifications to it, but it has to do with how law enforcement interacts with members of the public, whether or not they can investigate somebody, or rather, let me rephrase that. It has to do with whether or not they can communicate and what they can communicate with federal authorities. And I know we mentioned the connection to immigration here. There are federal laws that preempt the state from completely cutting off communication between law enforcement and federal agents. However, the legislature can create requirements as to what can be communicated beyond just immigration status. So, for example, the policy prohibits communication about an individual's whereabouts, what they look like, where they live, their phone number, things like that. However, due to federal law, we are not able to completely prohibit communication about immigration status, only if federal agents were to reach out and ask individual officers or agencies. There are also prohibitions in the fair and impartial policing policy about using state facilities, whether it's a barracks or a police department, using those facilities for interviews between federal agents and detainees. And it also generally states that Vermont law enforcement does not engage in civil immigration enforcement. So I think that covers some of the major points, especially as it relates to immigration, and I'll leave it open for anybody else if they also wanted to add to.
Any additional comments?
Happy to. So first off, if you're interested in the policy, on the Vermont Criminal Justice Council's website is a page called Policies, and it's posted there. So you could read along if you'd like. I will read it. No. I'm sorry, I'm a bit of a comic. I do want to read, I think, the opening paragraph of the purpose. The purpose of this policy is to require that all members of an agency conduct policing in a fair and impartial manner, to clarify the circumstances in which the officers can consider personal characteristics or citizenship or immigration status when making law enforcement decisions, and to reinforce processes and procedures, I start with that because what we're talking about is how do we treat people fairly? And I think people care about that. If I woke up on the wrong side of the bed, we've heard the story. Does the person get a ticket or a warning that day? Why do we write tickets or warnings or arrest a person? What are the reasons we do these things? Most people think it's emotionally driven for the police officer. We write tickets because we're trying to reduce crashes. We arrest drunk drivers because we're trying to reduce crashes. We arrest burglars because we're trying to reduce theft. Like, we are very mission-oriented of what we're trying to reduce. Sometimes mission can override good practice. And so the fair and impartial policing policy is engaging a ton of stakeholders to say, what's good for everyone? And that is a body of work handled by the Criminal Justice Council, which the legislature delegated the authority to develop the model policy to. And as Senator Hashim said, it serves as the floor, so agencies can update from there. One of the things that I have heard as sheriff is a desire to increase what our standard is. And I appreciate and bring value to the people who have championed that work. And some of you are in the crowd today and you know who I'm talking about, because it allowed us to have really good conversations. And one of the concerns I have is when we have a statewide standard that then we have different floors to. People have different expectations across county lines that we don't even really understand what the county lines are. And we start to run into issues around what is a person safe to do in Rockingham versus in Springfield. And that very quickly becomes a local issue that we're navigating. So a lot of really great conversations come from what this policy does. Senator Hashim mentioned the portion around civil immigration enforcement. There is a strict prohibition of Vermont law enforcement engaging in civil immigration enforcement that is separate from criminal immigration enforcement. And so people say, what do you do with ICE? I mean, I think that's the elephant in the room that I'd like to talk to. Nothing I don't have a salt truck. I don't have a sand truck. And there is a joke there as well. But at the same time, those are all the calls that my agency has with ICE, because what we recognize here in Windham County, our interactions with the federal government, specifically with federal law enforcement, is almost nothing. Not the FBI, not the ATF, not the Secret Service. We almost never work with the federal government because of just where we're geographically located. We don't have the resources. So I don't do anything with ICE, even if I could say on a policy or principle level, because they just don't show up. And that's historically been my experience in my 22 years with the Sheriff's Office, is we struggle to access any federal resources or services because we're too far away from the Albany office, which is really hosted out of Burlington, or too far away from the Boston office. And so we do our best with what we have. My closing comment on it is what we really do care about is how do we make our communities safe? And one of the things I know is, regardless of the federal government's jurisdiction and authority over immigration, the state has no significant or real authority on it. They have their role and responsibility. Vermont doesn't have the resources to do the things that people think my office does. I don't have the time to engage in the things that we absolutely don't have the resources to do, which includes the federal government's job. So generally speaking, we don't engage in federal duties because we have no funding for it, we have no resources for it, we have no ability to do it. We're trying to do the best we can with the meager resources we have, which is part of the reason we have the regional policing bill, is to try to do better with what we do have.
Thank you. So as a follow-up, you mentioned the differences between towns and counties and how things are. Could you possibly tell us, how were the changes communicated to deputies and officers across the state?
So the Criminal Justice Council is the certifying body for all law enforcement. My certification, Sergeant Noyes' certification are all hosted through this central body. It's essentially a licensing, training, and certification body, as well as a regulation body. They have a committee that develops the policy, and ultimately the council is who votes on it. They disseminate it to all law enforcement agency heads who are obligated to codify it. Each year we submit compliance reports to the Criminal Justice Council that we have done that. They have a professional regulation arm of the Criminal Justice Council that ensures we're doing what we're supposed to do and not pencil whipping it. The Attorney General's office will review policies if we want to deviate from it to ensure that we're meeting the minimum standard. And if we're not meeting the minimum standard, then they provide us the resources to come to the standard. Just one brief example, aside from training, there was a town that passed an ordinance that actually then violated the policy. And so the town now needed to change their ordinance to come in compliance with the policy. And no one expected it to happen. But that's why we start looking at how do we accomplish these things while towns have autonomy to pass ordinances. Every 2 years, all Vermont law enforcement goes through training on the policy. The policy is updated. It goes into review every 2 years where the committee determines whether or not it is sufficient. And that's, again, with input from stakeholders. All of you could be stakeholders if you wanted to attend. It's an open meeting. Again, that's all available through the Criminal Justice Council.
Thank you. Next question for anyone who would like. If federal immigration, you already spoke to this a bit, but maybe we can expand. If federal immigration enforcement agents came to Putney or another community and asked for local law enforcement's help, whether managing a crowd, executing a warrant, or detaining someone, what would happen?
Fireworks. It's as if this has occurred in the state of Vermont within the last few months that caught critical acclaim. I don't want to take from other panelists, but just briefly, certainly, as I said, we don't have a lot of resources, and so unlike other counties in the state, you won't see significant influx of law enforcement from my office unless there's something that we actually have a function or role in. Again, I separate the civil enforcement, so that is a person overstays their visa, we are going to do nothing with it. Whereas a person who is involved in human trafficking, we are going to do something with it. The problem I have is that I don't have the resources to investigate human trafficking, so very quickly we're talking to the state police or to federal partners who have the resources to start working on international human trafficking operation.
Any other comments?
I can speak for Westminster. To my knowledge, we have had no such interaction yet with ICE in Windham County. I can piggyback on the sheriff's sentiment that in terms of civil enforcement, there would be no enforcement action from the state police, and any other ancillary activity would be a decision that's made much higher than the barracks level, either by our state duty or Southern Watch, who's a higher ranking state police member who would eventually come to that decision on what, if anything, our involvement would be.
All right, and who's making the call on this? Is it the sheriff?
It depends. So a lot of people look at law enforcement collectively as like we're all one. And we share powers and authorities, we share policies. We are all separate bodies. And so there's an interesting dynamic in Vermont where you have an organization called the Department of Public Safety that houses the state police. They also house fire, safety, elevators, public safety things. Then you have an elected official called your sheriff. And that's someone you pick, the voters pick, who leads the organization that I have the privilege of leading. And we're ironically not a law enforcement agency. We're just empowered by the legislature to do law enforcement if towns want to contract with us for it, which is a really bizarre conversation, and I'll put a pin in it, except to say that's why we have a regional policing bill. So with that, the state police could make a decision that is separate from the decision the sheriff makes, that is separate from the decision a municipal police chief makes or constable makes, because they're all separate organizations making separate independent evaluations based on what their origin, their missions, and different things are. It is unlikely you're going to see an investigator with the Medical Malpractice Board engaged in an investigation, but that's yet another law enforcement agency that exists in the state. So who's making the decision depends on who's responsible for the organization, but all law enforcement is tied to, I'm sorry, not this document, to the policy on the Criminal Justice Council's website about fair and impartial policing.
So this is a little different perspective, but it really deals with, I think, one of the key issues about how would we respond if I showed up because we were working with immigrants, with refugees or whomever. I work 2 days a week at a Loaves and Fishes in Brattleboro. And in 2022, we established as part of our program of food service, a market for refugees and immigrants. And we still have that today. And on a Tuesday or Friday, we will have anywhere from 30 to 100 refugees, immigrants who come in and shop for food, and we try to have appropriate foods that the people we serve would like. But also, as there gets to be a concern about ICE and what they're doing to refugees and not what we want to happen in Vermont, I think it's important that community organizations know what they have the right to do. And what we learned was that and it's in a church, and our own church, and that I go to, in the church where we have Loaves and Fishes, they have put up signs. This is a safe space or sacred space. I think it's like whatever on certain doors, and we have the right to do that. But we also found out that we had a right, and I kind of sometimes serve as the doorkeeper, just when people were coming in and out, that we do have the right, if a person from ICE showed up, to ask them for a warrant. And there are two kinds of warrants. There's a general one, but you also can require, as I understand it, that they have a warrant approved by a judge. So we do not have to let them immediately come in. Now, I very much know that you have to honor and respect the law, but we also have a right as organizations to do things that we think are right. We have a plan of what we would do if they showed up at our door, or what we would ask the people if we were serving, where they could go and be in our building in a safe space. So I think that's what, we can't control the federal government. Clearly, they can't control themselves. But, anyway, that we do have the right to do, we need to be proactive about how we are prepared for the people we care about how we can serve them in the most efficient and in a safe way, in a compassionate way, which is what we want to do. I have worked in public community colleges in Texas, in Virginia, in Maryland, in New Jersey, in New York, and I am so grateful to be in Vermont. I feel like I've gone north toward home because I feel the state of Vermont is probably the most compassionate state. I feel the sensibilities here are, but it requires personal responsibility for organizations. You have to do what you can. Law enforcement, we can't ask them to break the law. We can't ask an elected official to knowingly break the law and put them in that position, nor should we. But we can work to change the law. And again, with this situation with immigration, it's going to be impossible currently to change anything at a broader level. But we can prepare ourselves here to do what we need to do. And I really encourage you, any of the organizations working with immigrants, with refugees, to be sure that they understand what their rights are and to have a plan about what they need to do and where they can be safe.
And I also just want to briefly add here that generally speaking, ICE is unlikely to ask for anything until things become extremely chaotic and dangerous and violent. And I think that was something that we saw up in South Burlington when law enforcement in that area wasn't even aware that ICE was executing this warrant, and only became aware after people started gathering at this house and a crowd started to form. And even after that, the communication was still very lacking. And I had a conversation with Commissioner Morrison of the Department of Public Safety the day after this happened, and we also had a few hearings on the topic. And one of the biggest challenges that all of these agencies faced was that there was no communication between the federal government and the local agencies. And I know a number of the agencies were encouraging ICE to just call it a day and go home, but they were not going to do that. And there was even an instance later on when ICE was trying to retrieve one of their vehicles that was left behind. And it's my understanding VSP was there in that area trying to keep things calm, and then all of a sudden pepper balls started flying, flares started flying without any warning, and this was all coming from ICE. There was no warning to it, and after that, essentially all hell broke loose. And so that incident in South Burlington was a unfortunate indicator of how this may unfold in the future. Hopefully, another instance like that does not happen in our state at all. But, yeah.
All right, thank you. So as a follow-up, you talk about, or Dr. Wood talked about an organization's responsibility. Let's go back to law enforcement. So if a federal agent were to ask law enforcement on the scene for information, whether it be where someone lives, what they drive, who their family is, what would the response be if multiple law enforcement agencies were there together? I stumped you?
No, I just have talked a lot, so I don't want to steal time from others. I was looking down the line.
I'm here in lieu of Lieutenant Wilkins. I had a 2-hour heads up before this, so I'm politely deferring to the sheriff.
I will gladly accept Sergeant Noyes' time. So it's so hard to predict any number of circumstances of who, what, how, when, what information we can or cannot, because all of this becomes a very legalistic conversation. What the federal law prohibits or does not allow a state to limit, what effects and impacts that those have. So broadly, as I speak to community groups such as this one, what I say is generally we do not do civil immigration enforcement. I say generally because that is as broad of a word as I can use to say like 99.9999999% I don't do it, but when the federal law tells me I have to, well, we're going to follow the law. And if we don't like the law, we need to change the law. And so I'm not an attorney. We've worked with the Attorney General's office in Vermont, the Civil Rights Division specifically. We've brought Assistant Attorney General Julio Thompson down to Windham County, who participated in a forum much like this one. And we started asking questions and presenting issues and saying, how do we start navigating very legal issues for the layperson? And what we keep finding is a whole bunch of gotchas, and we find a whole bunch of things where we say, we don't want to be put in this position because we're not trained, we're not funded, we don't even have the people most of the time to solve these issues. So I come back to, generally, we don't do it because I'm trying to do my best just to show up when your house is broken into, excuse me, and we don't have the bandwidth. I have 5.5 full-time employees who provide patrol services. That's for 15 towns. So when I say we don't have the resources, that is how real I'm talking about. There's 5.5 people who are here to help for my agency. We have more than that, and we do a variety of other services, which is why you might think that we are a large organization. And we are a large organization, but we do prisoner transports, court security, civil process service. We assist the state of Vermont in a variety of issues. And our new initiative is assisting with lead abatement in houses because there's not county government that normally applies for these grants. And so we're just doing it. So what am I focused on? I'm focused on our community. I'm focused on how we get the services for our community, and I don't really care if it's technically within the purview of what the sheriff does. If it's helping our community on the things that broadly improve public safety, which improving housing, in my opinion, does improve public safety, we'll do it. And so it's also important to me as a sheriff that our immigrant communities that are here, when they are participating in positive community impact, that they also know that they can come to us and say, this person assaulted me, and they feel they have trust to report a crime, than to have them hidden and be victims of a crime and have something continue to persevere in the community that impacts all of us. I would like to take the bad people, if we will, and I'd like the bad people to be taken care of in appropriate, humane ways that are within the system that we have developed and the laws that we have developed. And I don't really understand where the federal government can come in and tell me what I need to do, but not give me the resources, the power, the things, but they expect me to do something. So we just don't.
All right. Along that same line, how do you make sure that every person in this community, regardless of immigration status, language, or background, feels safe interacting with local law enforcement?
So when I've heard this question in the past, one of the points that I've always reiterated is that it really comes down to hiring the right people, hiring officers who have a good moral compass, who want to be a part of their community and want to engage in their community and do their job with compassion. If you hire those folks, and if the leadership in whatever respective agency also demonstrates those traits, then you're absolutely on the right path to ensuring that community members feel safe and are able to trust law enforcement. On the other hand, if you are hiring folks who don't have great moral compasses or who do not care about policing in a compassionate way or being involved in their community and being present in a way that doesn't just involve enforcement, then you're not going down the road of establishing trust and building those secure relationships between the community and law enforcement. So my answer to that question, the big one, is hiring the right people.
Additionally,
I'll piggyback on the senator's sentiment. So for my role as a supervisor, unfortunately, I would like to say that every law enforcement officer is, a bastion in their community and, this and that, but would be naive to say that's true. In my position, we do, quarterly random video reviews. I'm out on the road with my troops, seeing them and how they're interacting with the community, from firsthand basis. If I see or if another supervisor sees that someone's speaking to someone, unprofessionally, they're disrespectful, their tone is just not professional, we'll sit down with that person. We'll make sure that we can hopefully attempt to curtail those so that we don't have people who are, not treating people how they should be treated. I would like to think we could hire the right people, but in our role, we at least try to curtail that so that we don't have those, bad apples at least in our barracks level.
anything else?
Sure. Unless Cliff wants to go.
I was just going to say, I think the answer is that we hold our elected official accountable. Although Mark has done this for a very long time, he doesn't have tenure as sheriff. He has to be elected next fall. And if people think he's not doing his job, then the responsibility that we have as citizens is to express that. If we have an incident with an officer, again, that's not a pleasant one, we need to speak up. But the other thing that I think is really more important, because of the concerns I suspect some of you have, is that we make the immigrants, the refugees that we work with, comfortable with our local law enforcement. Because I do think that they've demonstrated that they're not out to get these people. They're there to help people, whether they're a citizen, whether they're an immigrant, whether they're a visitor from another state, and make them comfortable. And I can tell you, in the 8 years I've been at Loaves and Fishes, maybe 5 times we've had an incident, because we get some unusual people who come into our doors, and sometimes they're not always pleasant, where I felt that we needed to ask law enforcement to come in. I have to say, the way in which they came in, the way in which they approached and worked with the people was very impressive to me. And as I've said, I've worked in lots of places where that's not necessarily so. And I had an unpleasant experience here in Vermont recently. I go to the Southern State Correctional Facility twice a month to do a religious service. And when I go there, I've learned I leave everything in my pockets in the car, because I can't go, they have a locker you put them in. I take in my keys and my driver's license that I leave with the guard when I'm let through 4 locked doors to get to the room where we do the service. But I do have to carry a bag, and in this bag are hymnals, they're the service bulletin for the day, and there are communion elements, which are grape juice, cups, blessed wafers or host, if you will, and I have to carry that in. And now that I've done it so long, most of the people who check me out, and I go through a body search, I go through a metal detector, and mostly they just sort of look at my bag and I say, that's what I bring. A few weeks ago, I had an officer who decided he wanted to see what it was, and he just simply took it and dumped it on the floor. You know, my initial reaction was want to be, what in the hell? I just didn't say anything. I just stood there, because I know that that's who this officer is. That's not, I will mention it to the coordinator, volunteer coordinator, but I'm not going to change him there, and I'm not going to risk getting in a confrontation when I'm there for a particular service and miss my opportunity. It took all my self-control, which I don't have a lot of it these days, and to not say anything. But that's not the normal expectation. But I do think I had a responsibility to let the volunteer coordinator know that's what I'm experienced, and I'm hoping that they dealt with that in a different way, dealt with it appropriately. But mostly it's all very pleasant. I go through there, they let me in. I do, we have our service and it works fine. But again, it's a personal responsibility of how you relate to law enforcement officers. And in our case, it's the same with my children. How I expected them to relate to police officers and have respect for the law. And growing up, the same thing is we have that responsibility to our new neighbors and friends, to help them understand that, to not be afraid, but how to deal with it. So that's a personal response. We can talk about what the police ought to do, and sometimes they're restricted in what they can or cannot do. But we're not restricted in our ability to try to help our friends understand how they can deal with law enforcement officers.
You've heard 3 people speak to, I think what I would sum up with one statement, and you've all heard this too: culture eats policy for breakfast. And I truly believe that. So there's a book by a guy named Simon Sinek called The Infinite Game. I highly recommend it. This is not a book report, but highly recommend it. One of the things he talks about in his book is there is finite games. Football's a finite game. There's a goal, you try to win. There's infinite games, and the infinite games are the unwinnable games. Who's got the best cell phone? And we could battle that all day long, and well, none of us will win. Cliff might win because here we are. Answering this question is much like that infinite game. Like, there's not a right answer to this. I try to do the best I can to make anyone feel safe. Immigration status doesn't matter in my mind. Coming to meetings such as this one, going to town meeting, going to select board meetings. As a elected official, I think is an important way for me to do that. My office started teaching when we learned that the Afghanis were going to be coming to Vermont, of all places, and they were going to be integrating in our community as part of an initiative of the federal government, along with the Ethiopian Community Development Council, ECDC, out of Brattleboro. One of my concerns was, how do we keep roads safe for people who are now getting interjected into driving in Vermont and in the United States? I've been to a number of other countries through a variety of opportunities I've had. I've seen great drivers, I've seen terrible drivers. And people who've been to Afghanistan have told me there are some terrible drivers. Now, I don't know that that's a true statement of everyone from Afghanistan, but it's a concern for people crashing into each other, which is something we care about. So with that, one of the things that we started working on was a driving program that helps teach Afghani drivers and really immigrant drivers how to drive in Vermont on driving simulators that we secured through grant funding. And so one of the ways that we start working at the Sheriff's Office to build trust with the immigrant communities is by working with them. We partner with them. We're building into our culture, working with people that might be different than us. It might be different because of where they're from, the language they speak, their abilities. I mean, at the end of the day, we can go down the whole list, but it's really about saying, how do we work with our community? Because we're what we've got. When Irene came through and blew up bridges and roads, the neighbors were the neighbors helping the neighbors. And I might have been your neighbor trying to throw a bag of groceries across the big ravine, and I don't think you really cared what I looked like or what I did if it was helping you. And so what we're trying to do is bridge that gap of that infinite game to say, how do we do the best we can? And so we try to build into our culture, working with people, working with community to build out what we do.
As a follow-up on that, so do people have to identify themselves to law enforcement? And do they have to answer questions? And what are their rights in that interaction?
This is a great question for a defense attorney. Thank you. So this isn't legal advice, by the way, but if you are detained, you do have to identify yourself. The advice that I give to everybody is you don't have to answer any questions, and you probably shouldn't. But I mean, there are some circumstances where it might make sense. I mean, if I'm walking down Main Street in Brattleboro and I see, somebody assault another person, and then, he takes off, and then an officer is chasing him, and he says, "Did you see a person wearing," he describes the suspect, and I say, "Yeah, he ran that way." Then I'm going to go along my merry way. But if you find yourself detained by law enforcement and you have no idea why, or maybe you do have an idea why, you do have to identify yourself, and then you should ask for an attorney.
Do you want to give your phone number right now? Or?
No, it's not a business pitch. That's just the answer.
If you read the policy on the Vermont Criminal Justice Council website, under Section 4A, an individual shall not be stopped or detained solely for the purpose of establishing identity. And so, if Vermont law enforcement is asking to identify you, we must have a purpose for asking for it. We can't just do a fishing expedition. When is that going to happen? I stopped you for speeding and I need to see your license and registration and proof of insurance. I don't want to give it. I have authority under the state to respond to that, a lack of identification. When you've been arrested, when you are suspected of a crime, and those are generally the times that we are going to be asking for identification. We may ask for identification from people who are not directly involved in a crime, and that is not prohibited. It does not mean you have to give it. You may not. We will tell you whether you're obligated or not. It's not like a gotcha game. So for us, it's very much, we're trying to accomplish the mission that we're setting out to achieve, and usually it is responsive and reactive to calls that we have had, complaints that we have received, issues we've observed.
All right. Sort of another follow-up on that. we haven't had a South Burlington issue down here. But if there were to be one, how would law enforcement communicate with the community while it was unfolding and afterwards?
I'm not sure we have the infrastructure in Windham County in southern Vermont, and also define southern Vermont south of Route 4. I don't know that we have the infrastructure to really communicate with the community. I can post on Facebook, that gets about 10,000 people out of a county of 44,000, assuming everyone's in the county, and I know that they're not. I don't know if anybody uses Twitter. YouTube, we can't generate the footage quick enough. I can push out a press release. I can use Vermont Alert. Do people get those? And so we can start really quickly peeling apart who gets access to what information. And at the end of the day, do you have the bandwidth to receive that information? And I say that because if I send out an email today or right now saying, hey, this is what's going on with ICE in Marksville, and you're all here, did you see it? Did you get to read it? And so we don't have great infrastructure to really communicate it out. What I will say, and I'm sure some remember Vermont Yankee, it's just about fully deconstructed now. One of the things that happened frequently while Vermont Yankee was operating was protests. They were organized, they were planned, they were prepared. And part of that planning was with local law enforcement, where people were saying, we intend to get arrested, and we'd say, okay. And then we would start working on a plan to deal with the arrests that were on a political basis. Some of it was protected by First Amendment speech, some of it was not. But there were people who were saying, this is our intent, we have 300 people coming to protest at the plant, and we're gonna get arrested. And we said, we'll get school buses, we'll have tents, so we're not dealing with heat stress emergencies, we'll have water, and we will process you in the criminal justice system, and that's what we're gonna do. And we organized it and we worked it out. So while I can't necessarily say we can have such exquisite planning for when ICE will show up unannounced, and truly they will not be calling me to say they're coming, we can still talk about it as a community, which is what we're doing now. Generally speaking, when Vermont law enforcement's responding, we are not working on civil immigration matters, and you're going to hear me repeat things because they're important. But the second part is when we're engaging with you, we're part of your community, we're going to see you again. The ICE agents might be in El Paso next month. We need to work with you, we need those relationships, we need that trust. And so when we're interacting with you, what we're asking, if you were to come out to help support an immigrant neighbor, if you were coming out to support law enforcement, please listen to your law enforcement officers who are present, who are saying, this is what we're doing, we are there to communicate with you, we're going to do that. We're generally not involved in the politics of any of it. Our goal is safety for people who are involved and to accomplish whatever that mission is, as long as it's lawful.
Thank you. If something were to go wrong, if a deputy or officer acts in a way that violates the fair and impartial policy, what would happen?
So each agency is through separate policy known as the Internal Affairs Policy. It might be a different name, but they all do the same thing. Each agency is obligated to have an internal affairs process, and so that's where you file a complaint with the agency, specifically the agency head. That'd be the sheriff. For the state police, I'm not sure if it goes to your internal affairs.
It would end up at internal affairs if it was validated. Most of the times I get complaints somewhat frequently that will start at my level. I'll then call whoever the complainant for that is. After that, if it's substantiated, I will essentially just pass it up through my boss, who passes it up and up and up until, if it does go to internal affairs, and they will conduct a final investigation.
So it's incredibly important to know who the officer works for to use the agency process. Because if you make a complaint about a trooper to my office, I will refer you to the state police, and you might get frustrated saying, why didn't the sheriff do that? I have no authority. So at the agency level, that exists for every agency in the state, where it's the agency head, but also true of all law enforcement. We have the Vermont Criminal Justice Council through its professional regulation portion that has the ability for you to report a violation through their website. They have an investigator, they have an attorney, and they also have a committee that reviews these types of things. So if I were to do something wrong, you can file the complaint with the Criminal Justice Council, and I have no control over that. But you can file that complaint with the council, and then they'll investigate it, and the council is ultimately the hearing body that would reflect on it. You can also use that for any law enforcement officer. What they will do is, if it's reported through them, they will refer to the agency head for that agency to then investigate and determine. So it's a pretty robust system that provides accountability all the way around, but also provides some sort of function to resolve the complaints. My personal experience has been it's usually a miscommunication or a misunderstanding, and we can start sitting down with people, say, here's body-worn camera footage, here's the cruiser camera, here's how we see it, here's how you saw it, and we can start having the conversation of why things happened. Just as a quick antidote, we had a complaint about a deputy who was discriminating against a person for their race, and they weren't, in our opinion. They were discriminating because the driver was drunk. But the passenger didn't know that they were drunk. And so before we even went through it, we explained what a DUI investigation looks like and the steps and why we do it that way. We can reference material, and when that's what played out on the video, they said, my goodness, I had no idea this is how it happened. Now that's an ideal for me, but when my deputy does something wrong, we also have processes for dealing with that. And that can include up to revocation of their certification and termination. I mean, these are very serious things that we're talking about, but it's also why we have incredibly well-trained, very adept people. Despite the lack of resources I talk about, we commit a lot to making sure we have professional officers throughout the state of Vermont.
So who would the first call be for someone who wanted to file a complaint?
I would always encourage contact the agency. If you know who the agency is, contact the agency. It's the quickest way to resolution. But you always have the council through their website, vcjc.vermont.gov, who has a function. There's an online report, and it will follow through the chain that they have to get it to the agency head. Again, it's incredibly important that you know who it is. We know kind of how to work our own internal system. So if I know that there's an issue with the state police, I know I can call Lieutenant Wilkins and say, here's the problem and where do you want it to go? And I will call whoever you need me to call. But I'll always follow what their recommendation is for their systems. We're used to dealing with this. There's also opportunities for civil lawsuits. So you could talk to an attorney. You can contact, there's a variety of groups around the state that also work on police accountability and civil rights. You can contact them and they can provide support, legal aid. I mean, there's a variety of resources that are out there as long as you just know where to look.
All right, thank you. When officers are in the field, especially in a complex or crowded situation, how can community members know who they are interacting with and what agency they represent?
Well, I can take a moment and talk about some legislation that we were working on this session that doesn't directly answer the question, but gets to the underlying issue of officers operating anonymously or officers being identifiable with their names and their agencies. So I'm sure most, if not all the folks in this room, heard of a bill known as S-208. This was the masking bill that started in the Senate. It was one of my priorities. It was a bill that prohibited law enforcement from wearing masks when interacting with the public, and also prohibited them from not being identifiable with their uniform and having their name and agency. There were a number of exceptions carved out into that bill, and many of them were, actually all of them were quite reasonable. So for example, scuba diving. If an officer is scuba diving, I'm sure we can all agree they can wear a mask. We did get into more deeper conversations about extreme weather, because that does become an issue in Vermont. If you're looking for a lost hiker on the side of a mountain And with the wind chill and it's negative 10 degrees, you're going to need a face covering so that you don't get frostbite. And things got more complicated as we started talking about the online investigations that law enforcement does. Detectives who may pose as an underage person in a chat room and they're doing human trafficking investigations or child sexual exploitation investigations. That is an officer who's using deception and they're putting on a persona that isn't real in order to do what is, in my opinion, a very important investigation. And so we spent a lot of time working through those exceptions to make sure that they made sense. The biggest hurdle that we encountered was the Ninth Circuit decision from California regarding somewhat similar legislation that prohibited masking, stating that that their legislation, which included prohibiting law enforcement from federal law enforcement from wearing masks, that circuit concluded that it was unconstitutional to regulate federal law enforcement. And I'm not going to get too into the weeds on that, but it is not uncommon for different circuits to have different opinions about constitutional questions. So for example, there are some circuit courts that believe a waiting period for purchasing a firearm is constitutional, and then there are other circuits that believe it's unconstitutional. And so that question as to whether or not we could regulate federal agents caused the House to get cold feet when it comes to having federal agents included in S-208. After a lot of deliberation and persuasion between myself and the chair of House Judiciary, we were able to put the feds back into the bill, but due to the unwillingness of House Republicans to suspend the rules, we were not able to move that legislation on the final day of the session. So that is one of the bills that we worked on regarding law enforcement identification and making sure that people know who they're interacting with when they are talking to agents of the government. Generally speaking, I think Americans and Vermonters and really most people in this country expect that we're not going to have secret police, whether it's on the state, local, or federal level. And depending on how Connecticut's law transpires in the Second Circuit will determine whether or not there's a likelihood that S-208 will be reintroduced this upcoming session. So since we were talking about identification, I just wanted to talk about S-208 and regarding how it actually unfolds and what the requirements are currently, I will defer to the law enforcement at the table.
So to the Sheriff's Office and the Vermont State Police, what is your policy for requiring names, badge numbers, agency affiliation?
So from the state police, we will identify, trooper so-and-so, Vermont State Police. In terms of badge numbers, because we get that question a lot, we actually don't have badge numbers. The only thing on our badge says is this year the state police were founded. So if you do want to know our cruiser numbers, that is something that you could ask, but just for clarification, we do not have badge numbers in the state police. But we will identify at any call, we will announce our presence lawfully that we are there, so that even for our safety, so that everyone knows that they're interacting with the state police and it's not just some random person knocking on their door at 2 a.m.
I don't think I'll be as quick with my phone on the policy here. The policy covers us identifying ourselves to the public when we're engaged in enforcement actions. There are some common sense examples that we can talk about where it would just make no sense. The one we joke about is like an undercover cop. Are you a cop? You got to tell me if you're a cop. Undercover situations would be exempt. Senator Hashim talked about S-208 and all of the logic that followed why the bill was being presented in the Senate, I totally got. Personally, I had struggles with some of the specifics of the bill because of how we would operationalize it. So he was talking about the list of exceptions, and we were working with the legislature in both chambers, the Senate and the House, to say these are things that we're talking about. I have an obligation as an employer. We're not talking about law enforcement anymore. This is just employment law. I have an obligation as an employer to protect my staff. They get frostbite because they're not allowed to wear this. Am I liable as the employer, or is the state liable for these things? And so we're starting to navigate through some of the ways that we deal with this. I have deputies who go on snowmobiles. They need to wear a helmet. What if they don't take their helmet off? We're talking about a mask. And so we start going down the list, specific, a respirator, an N95 respirator was included on the list in the original bill. We said, but there's other respirators too. What about those? And so firefighters, we know the full face apparatus firefighters wear. There's also other breathing type. At one point, my office had respirators due to a chemical irritant that the Department of Corrections had deployed, which if we were to go into a prison to remove a person to transport them and that irritant was deployed, I need to protect my staff. So we started getting into the specific conversation of what did we not remember? So frustrations we had were not with intent because as the sheriff, I spend a lot of money on uniforms, and I want you to know who they are because you are saving me from a lawsuit when I know who the complaint is filed against when you call my agency and say, it was that person in that car, they were wearing that color uniform, their name tag was this. Whatever the details you can get me that help me actually resolve the issue protects my liability. It keeps my insurance rate low. And these are all the business ends of all the things I have to come talk to your select boards about when I say this is what it's going to cost for me to provide service. So it's very much connected to the world I live in to say, I want you to know who my people are, but I also want common sense to prevail when bad people, and I don't like using stereotypes of bad people and good people, but when bad people are doing bad things, allow the police officers to come in and do the things that we generally as a society, as a body politic want to happen. So I always appreciated the dialogue around this because at the same time, what we don't support is someone putting on a mask, coming in, pummeling someone under the guise of being law enforcement, and then just disappearing. There's no paperwork, there's no case, there's no anything. They just acted like a bully or a thug. They came in and did something that should not happen, and then they just disappeared. If I had Velcro on my patches and I just started replacing them with state police patches, I think people would be upset, and no, they're not Velcro. But I think people would be upset, and I think most people would say, that's wrong. We generally have that moral compass in all of us, even if we disagree on the politics of any given issue. We have the moral compass to recognize right and wrong. And so this is where I appreciated the work on S208 because we had a lot of really great conversations with our elected representatives saying, this is what I'm concerned about as an agency head. This is what my deputies are concerned about. But we were looking at ways to navigate around it. What ultimately happened wasn't necessarily related to our appreciation or gripes with S208. It was a procedural issue with a vote. And that's part of the process too. And so for it to come back in a future session, like, let's keep working on it and let's have those conversations. But it's talking with other agency heads throughout the state, but specifically in Windham County, we all, I think collectively, I could say this fairly, we want our people to be recognized. We want the public to be able to call and make a complaint on who it is because it protects us really. It saves us from future problems and far worse problems.
Thank you. I'm shocked and happy to say we're about 15 minutes ahead of schedule. You guys have been answering all the questions as well as the follow-ups very succinctly. Thank you. Are we ready to move on to the open floor? So we ask that you keep your questions to 2 minutes or less so that we can hear from as many voices as possible. And we're going to start, I believe, by reading a few questions that were submitted in advance.
Yes, so first I'm going to read a question that's come up a few times, and I'm actually going to answer it because this panel would not be able to answer it. So the question is, why isn't there anyone from Migrant Justice or another immigrant support advocacy organization represented on this panel? The Equity and Inclusion Advisory Committee is an advisory committee to the Select Board, specifically to the town of Putney's Select Board. As our co-chair Swift shared at the beginning of this meeting, the reason this panel is taking place is to understand how our local contracted policing body enacts fair and impartial policing. What she didn't share was that we were also asked before this took place to invite ICE to come and speak. And we had this very narrow charge and were able to stay within it. So ICE is, I wouldn't even know where to begin with that, but ICE is not here. I hope that this is just part of a conversation. We are just a piece of what is happening within our communities. We are within a container that we're working in, and I hope that this conversation goes out amongst local groups and that local groups choose to invite Migrant Justice and other organizations to be a part of a panel, and that these conversations continue in other ways. And I'll just finish there. So, two questions that, well, actually, this question has been asked multiple times in different ways, and I tried to condense it down into one question for all of you. So, two questions were asked about what law enforcement would do if ICE came to Putney and asked for help from local law enforcement. The person that wrote this question didn't feel like they heard an answer to either question, and they're still interested in hearing that answer. Recalling the Burlington incidents, what concerns, barriers might there be if ICE has a judicial warrant and needed local assistance to enter a residence and then made unrelated civil arrests? And is helping ICE make an arrest, and when we say ICE, we should be talking about federal immigration enforcement. I believe that we actually have a lot more of Customs and Border Patrol within our state than we actually have ICE. So they ask, is helping ICE make an arrest a civil matter, make an arrest in a civil matter a violation of the fair and impartial policing policy? Do you want me to repeat any of that?
The answer to that last one is yes. And it's prohibited to, for local law enforcement to engage in federal civil immigration enforcement. So the answer is yes, if I heard the question correctly.
Could you repeat the question? Just so
Sure, because it was like also three questions squished into one. So I think that what I'm going to ask is, recalling the Burlington incidents, what concerns might there be if ICE has a judicial warrant and needed local assistance to enter a residence and then made unrelated civil arrests? And is helping ICE in that in that civil matter a violation of the policy? And Senator Hashim answered, yes, that piece is a violation. I think what people are really trying to get at is what we saw happen in Burlington was scary. And we really want to know how you would react in those moments. And that may be a question you can't answer, but we're going to keep asking it.
I mean, I'll also just add that this isn't going to be a satisfying answer, but a lot of it really, it depends. There is an infinite number of variables and hypothetical scenarios that can change how a certain situation can be interpreted by the Vermont Criminal Justice Council or the Human Rights Commission or the leadership in that agency. And again, the unsatisfying answer is it's going to depend on the nearly infinite number of variables and whatever the hypothetical may be.
Not that I disagree with Senator Hashim on his answers, yes, but I also agree with Senator Hashim on his answer. It's complicated. And so to the question of how would we assist federal agents with a judicial warrant. I'm going to call them federal agents because they're federal agents and they're employed by ICE, but they're federal agents. An FBI agent is a federal agent. They're an 1811. That's their code. I'm not going to try to explain what it means because I don't know myself. But ICE are 1811s. The ATF are 1811s. It's the same thing as saying Sergeant Noyes is a certified law enforcement officer in the state of Vermont and Sheriff Anderson is a certified law enforcement officer in the state of Vermont. And so if we were told there's a judicially issued warrant for, pick the number one fugitive in the United States right now, and they are at the post office in Putney, and ICE is at the post office in Putney and says this person's wanted for these terrible crimes during 9/11. We'd help. It's a criminal warrant. We will engage in criminal enforcement, including assisting the federal government with enforcement of criminal orders. 99% of what the federal government does on criminal investigation, I don't even know. So now I'm back to, I need to talk to an attorney. Do I have jurisdiction here or not? Because I don't know what are federal crimes or are not federal crimes. I'm not trained on it. So very quickly, we are into the infinity variable problem of Mark doesn't know and can I be here or not? So what do I need to do? I need to ask a whole lot of people questions, including our state's attorney, the attorney general, my personal attorney, because I hold personal liability with all of this. And if I screw it up, I can be permanently decertified, which comes with very significant implications on my job, just like every law enforcement officer. So there are some pretty hefty penalties if we get it wrong. And so we don't have a split-second decision. In fact, we want to say, let's slow it down and ask the right questions, because I don't want to put my back on the line and get it wrong because somebody was trying to serve paperwork.
I just want to quickly distinguish, I agree with that, but I want to distinguish, between civil and criminal. In the instance where, let's say ICE calls the barracks and they say, hey, somebody you talked to last night, their visa expired and we'd like to detain them. Can you show us where they live? Can you take us there? Can you join us on this detainment? And the trooper goes to help. I think that would very likely be a violation of the fair and impartial policing policy when it comes to civil immigration enforcement. So big distinction between civil and criminal. Just wanted to make sure that's put out there.
And I totally agree. And so there are some things that are very clear for us saying, no, we can't do that. Another piece that is very clear, I can't call ICE because I stop a person and they're speaking Spanish or Pashto and say, I don't speak this language. Federal agents, can you come translate for me? There are ways for us to get translators. In fact, the little black box translates for us now. So that's pretty cool. But in those contexts, we can't do that. And in my opinion, or my experience, I guess I should say, the most common violations of the fair and impartial policing policy is around lack of access to resources and asking for assistance with interpretation. That's what I've seen the most. It's usually on agencies on the northern border because they work very closely with Customs and Border Patrol, who have often dual lingual officers. And it's a mistake. And they make a mistake, and this is where we come back to culture eats policy. So when the culture is we have to work together because there's 3 law enforcement officers to cover 30 towns on the northern border, now what? And those 3 officers work with each other because they have no one else. And so it's wrong, and we need to address the policy violations, and we do, and we offer training, and we offer a variety of disciplinary consequences when they're necessary. But at the same time, we want people to learn from their mistakes. In fact, it's the number one way that humans learn, mistakes. What we don't want is for it to offend the community, for it to cause some pretty significant detrimental consequences because, well, their one mistake led the person to being deported and now they're in Venezuela in a prison. And that wasn't really part of the overstayed visa plan. Like, we had no clue that was even happening.
Let me go back and ask you a question about something that you mentioned that I, as a citizen of Windham County, would expect your police officers to be able to do, and you brought it up yourself, and that is the ability to communicate with someone who is not speaking a language because you have a phone. we have a person who comes in, a wonderful, wonderful worker, who is a Ukrainian refugee, and she speaks no English. And I communicate her with the phone that she has because she's learned very quickly. She can talk to people and they can understand her. She can be in Ukraine and it's translated immediately. Do all of your officers who interact and have the ability with the public have that capacity to do if they came and a person could not speak English so that there are no mistakes made? Have you taught them now that are required them to have that? And if not, I think you probably should.
I would totally agree. We probably should. Vermont law enforcement is usually about 10 to 20 years behind any technological advance. If you know me, I love technology and I use it frequently, and I try to get my staff on my page within 10 to 20 years. There's a joke there too, but oftentimes we struggle trying to teach them how to use Google Translate. And the newest technology is AirPods, if you have an iPhone. And some of the Apple artificial intelligence stuff, AirPods will translate in real time into a language. It's like, I just learned about that 2 weeks ago. So no, we haven't trained it yet. What we have...
It's on your list to do.
Oh, it's absolutely on my list. Because what we have is the $300 an hour translation service that I have no money to pay for. So we always are figuring out how we have to give access to people who require translation services. Where our agency has been fortunate is it's almost always, the language we're almost always translating up until about 2019 was American Sign Language. And we have such a wide access to ASL interpreters in this area, partially because of the Austin School when they were even still running, but even people who stuck around, that we were able to access those types of translators. But we certainly have people who speak Spanish, Pashto, a variety of different languages. I can't list them all. And so having access to the technology is a huge step forward from a cost perspective, but also from an access perspective. If their cell phone has service, which it all depends on having service. And so we need our legislators to get Verizon and AT&T to get better service.
So I'm going to follow up on that question, and then I'm going to ask a completely different question that came from the audience. Do Vermont police agencies have a responsibility to step in if federal law enforcement agents are breaking the law? Are you looking
I would
up the
say
answer?
yes.
He's going to Google Translate.
No habla. So there, you've heard yes. And there is a statewide use of force policy that talks about Vermont law enforcement's obligation to intervene when we see someone doing something wrong. And I'm going to say it that simply. It's more detailed than that in the policy, and it's available on the Criminal Justice Council website where you can go read about it. This is where law enforcement oftentimes feels we're in a bit of a pickle, because sometimes we're being told we need to intervene, and we're intervening in a body of law that we don't know if it's legal or illegal. And so, like, there's things where it's like, what is the least harmful solution? One of the scenarios that Assistant Attorney General Thompson gave my agency was, what do we do when a federal agent says they need to speak to a person we're transporting outside of the courthouse and outside of the correctional facility? We're stopped at the gas station, they say I need to talk to that person. I have an obligation to cooperate with them if they have a lawful purpose. And if we don't, we're violating federal law. If we cooperate and they're doing civil enforcement, we're violating state law. If they don't tell us what they're doing, and there's no obligation for them to tell us what they're doing, we don't know. And so what do I tell my staff? Risk their certification or risk federal detention? There's not a good answer to that. This is some of the things that this dialogue and through these community sessions, we've started bringing these up. Now, I haven't had that ever happen. It's a straight up hypothetical, but it's a very simple legal hypothetical where law enforcement is saying, how do we navigate these problems? We just want to be told what to do. And that's usually why I struggle with my staff teaching them about technology. Like, this is fun. Like, how do I use it? They want me to teach them the 3 buttons to push. And so to that end, as we start navigating some very tricky things, what law enforcement officers in Vermont get frustrated by is the policy, I'll say it in my words, it was written by attorneys for attorneys, and we have non-attorneys who are trying to understand what are they supposed to do to get the prisoner from the courthouse to the jail or vice versa. What are we supposed to do when we stop a person who is not speaking a language we understand, and how do we communicate with them to do the things that their boss told them to do? And it can be hard for them because they're trying to analyze chapters and chapters of training across many, 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 many weeks, across annual updates, across legislative change, and it's shifting always. So it becomes really hard when we're making it really complicated and when we don't have the resources to get them the best access to information, to give them the on-call translator, the on-call attorney who can just say, yeah, this is what you should do. We don't have that. I might get a response from the Attorney General's office in 6 weeks. It didn't help me on the car stop.
I'm curious if the state police want to answer that question.
So I can answer it from my perspective, at least at the barracks level. If there was ever that scenario presented, I would immediately contact someone. So in state police, on any given night shift after 5 o'clock ends, we have Southern Watch, so it's a commander, a lieutenant, or a captain in charge of the southern half of the state, and there's a northern commander. On top of them is state duty, which is again an even higher ranking member of the state police. If there's anything that I am not sure of and I don't know necessarily how we're going to proceed, I make that phone call to get the ball rolling. We're certainly not rushing into something without having the right answer going forward. So kind of what the sheriff said earlier, my mentality is slowing things down, not rushing into something without having the information, because the last thing we want to do is violate someone's rights or break the law.
So shifting gears a little bit, one of the more frequent interactions between local law enforcement and the public is individuals in a mental health crisis. How do these interactions fit into the fair and impartial policing policy?
Same as everyone else. I'm not saying that to be brief, except for brief is the correct answer. Mental health patients are treated the same as everyone else. In fact, it's the broad concept of fair and impartial policing is that we treat people the same, that we're not introducing bias, including about disabilities, which are also protected by the ADA. We're not treating disabilities, including mental health, as a factor for alternative treatment. However, mental health treatment also requires additional services and resources. It is an incredibly hard thing when we work with partners like HCRS, with Department of Mental Health, and we're saying we have a person who needs treatment, and they said, I feel good and I'm leaving because they were placed on a voluntary status in a treatment facility, which means they have a right to leave. And there's people I've spoken to tonight who've had to deal with people suffering mental illness in their community, on your roads, your neighbors, saying, why did it take so long? Our systems are struggling. So how do we treat them? The same, but there are services that are designed to try to deliver care to them in the community, deliver care to them in a hospital setting. Institutions are pretty much gone. They pretty much don't exist in the United States anymore. The Vermont's last institution flooded in Irene. It was the state hospital in Waterbury. There are no new institutions. The Retreat, you could say, is an institution, except they've really brought their population counts down. They're grandfathered under the size because of when they were built. They're a wonderful partner in the community to provide services, but even most of what they're dealing with now are addiction services. They're not even treating as much mental illness. Separate from fair and impartial policing, but I think it's important to talk about with mental health, our statewide use of force policy, which is not a model policy, is the statewide policy on how force is applied by law enforcement. There's a carve out specific to mental health patients and how law enforcement interacts and uses force for mental health patients. Gone are the days where lobotomies were performed as part of mental health treatment. Law enforcement has updated its practices as well. So some of the things that we've done as updates to that is using things such as soft restraints, plainclothes officers, using unmarked cars, so that we're not dealing with a person who is dangerous, who is attempting to hurt themselves or others, but really needs to see a doctor. We're not trying to criminalize the mentally ill. We're trying to get them help so that they're not terrorizing you because the pot of gold that nobody else can see was stolen. And sometimes we're dealing with other people's worlds that are not the same worlds that we all share. And so how we navigate those things. The system is struggling. It is hard. There are good people doing some really good work, but it's struggling because it is such a significant and pervasive issue that we're dealing with.
It is a big issue, and one of the things that you may or may not be aware of, that now if you study police science, criminal justice at John Jay, which is probably one of the premier trained law enforcement officers, they now have a major in police science with a major in social work and mental health. Because what they're saying is that police departments, and certainly even though we're not in an urban area, we're in Brattleboro, would benefit from having more of their police officers on the street who are trained as mental health workers, social workers, because I'm probably generalizing, but I suspect most of the issues there that generate from someone with a problem with substance abuse. And it's like I ask at the Southern State Correctional Facility that has 280 generally, why are they there, what are their crimes? What I was told by the head of that organization was, whatever the crime is, 90% of them drugs are involved. So if we talk about a community issue for us here in Windham County, we should be concerned that we provide the resources to our sheriff, to our municipalities, that they are able to have police officers with that specific training. Because they're much more needed for what's going on in criminal areas or in disturbance areas than there are in other things. And I just think that's something, again, it's a question of resources, but it's also thinking very differently about what are police services that are needed on a day-to-day basis by the residents in a particular area. And where we are, that's probably one of our greater needs, and I'm not sure it gets some attention, but probably not the attention it deserves.
If I could take some panelist prerogative, Sergeant Noyes, would you mind talking about the police social worker program embedded at the barracks?
Yeah, so at the Westminster Barracks, we now currently have 2 embedded mental health workers. They're HCRS liaisons who are at the barracks. Now we have 1 full-time on day shift, and we just got 1 to be full-time on night shift. They are extremely beneficial. I wish we had more of them. We will essentially refer any mental health call that comes into us to them first to have that initial contact. We will take them to calls with us. Obviously, their safety is important to us as the safety of the person we're dealing with. That resource has been absolutely beneficial. That being said, there are gaps. They don't work 24 hours. If they can't come out, they have vacations, they have weekends. We do fall back on HCRS in those instances. Sometimes they come out, sometimes they don't. Sometimes they put the onus on, we've had people who we think are at risk and they say, oh, well, they don't see a risk to us, so we're gonna leave and go home. And we're kind of there like, okay, well, I wish we had a better solution to this, but they said this is what we're doing. But through the embedded mental health program, it has gone a long way from where it used to be. I think it's extremely beneficial to have someone with that training on scenes with us. Troopers are not mental health clinicians. We can't solve, problems that are weeks, months, years in advance in a single moment. So I can't speak more enough to that. And again, want many more of them, at least at Westminster Barracks.
So one of the things, can you hear me? I'm back. One of the things with the police social worker program, last time I worked with a number of you on the fair and impartial policing policy, conversation completely outside of the scope of the public conversation. Conversation I had with Susanna Davis, who's the director of the Office of Racial Equity for the state of Vermont, was about this program. In some communities in Vermont, the social workers are supervised by law enforcement officers, and I think that's nuts. I'm saying that as a law enforcement officer, as a leader of an agency, because I haven't got the slightest clue what they need supervision on. I would not want the responsibility. I would not want to learn the responsibility, not because I have an issue with learning about social work, but they are dealing very much in a medical world, and I'm not a medical provider. One of the things I really like with how this has been rolled out with the state police barracks as part of the initiative with the Department of Mental Health is that these are not supervised by law enforcement. They're embedded with law enforcement. And so they're supervised, in our case, by HCRS. It's our designated mental health provider in Windham and Windsor counties. And so they have providers, clinicians, doctors who are supervising and making sure that the people are treated with medical science and not with, well, we're trying to solve the problem, and so bon voyage. There are frustrations because as you heard from Sergeant Noyes, there's gaps. We don't have full coverage. We don't have enough people. We don't have people interested in going in the field because they get yelled at. They have bodily fluids thrown at them, whether they don't deserve it. Things are happening to our mental health professionals that are awful and terrible, and I praise every day that they come to work because we really need them and they're doing tremendous work. And I really appreciate the model in talking with Susanna because she acknowledged where the embedded social workers or crisis workers are not supervised by law enforcement. We see better outcomes. We see things happen. And this ties back to the fair and impartial policing policy. The other thing I want to say is that while the workers are embedded at the state police barracks, we work with the state police and we access the sheriff's office, accesses the social workers there. HCRS has been a tremendous partner. There's 3 social workers at the Brattleboro Police Department who they will also come into towns outside of Brattleboro because they are HCRS is the designated provider for Windham and Windsor counties. So we get access through the sheriff's department to them. We had a social worker that was grant funded. We lost the grant funding after it expired and we couldn't get another grant to bring it around. So I'd love to find a funding source that does it, but this is also a system where we recognize that taxpayers need to be able to afford where they live too and the services that they're accessing. So we do have a system that we've pulled together through our partnership with the state police, with Brattleboro PD, to get access for the Putney community and surrounding communities. But I also, while it sounds like we have a great thing going, and we do, it is not a 100% thing. It is not a robust thing. We are duct tape and bubble gum and sticks and anything else we can do to keep this thing together. I also think it's important to acknowledge a few people who were part of putting all of that work together. Mike Maricky, representative for Putney Dummerston. Jeanette White, a retired senator for Windham County. Senator Hashim, who is also part of this work. I mean, there's so many people, and those are 3 people I see in the room, and I apologize if I missed someone, but like these are awesome things that conversations like this drive. And when we can come together as a group to say, here's an idea, like regional policing, but I'm not here to talk about that. When there's an idea that we can drive, that's how we get success in Montpelier. And it's really communities coming together saying, this is what we need, and here's a way we can work together as neighbors. We'll put aside our differences. We can work together on these things. So just wanted to call that out.
So we have a whole list of questions here that came in from folks in the audience and folks that wrote in before this took place, but I do want to recognize the time and give opportunity if anybody out there wants to ask a direct question themselves. So if you want to do that, raise your hand, please.
Thanks. I'll be quick. Thanks very much. This has been really interesting and instructive. I'm thinking maybe this question is directed at first to Dr. Wood, to Cliff. Because it's about, I volunteer with the Putney Food Shelf, where we serve anywhere up to 200 people on Fridays and Saturdays. It's a super busy place. We serve not Putney, but all those surrounding communities, including Brattleboro. We've not, that I'm aware of, had any incidents like this, but I'm wondering about what's the best way to put together a plan. Our facility, our community center is very open. There's nobody standing at the door. checking people in. We don't take any names. Somebody could just walk in and go to the room where 40, 50 people are waiting. So that's the first part of my question is what's the best way to put together a plan? What organization would we work with to do that? And I must say, after listening to all this, I feel very much that we're on our own here. You know, if there's a problem between, not just at the food shelf, but in general, if there's a problem between two of our customers and they get into a brawl, which also doesn't happen, I know who to call. But if an agent comes in and wants to take somebody away, we do have Afghan refugees. We have other people who aren't from this country as well, who may not be refugees, but look different than we do. And there's force involved. Who do we call? What do I do? You know, I just don't know. Even from listening to all this, do I call Nader? You know, probably
Well,
for advice.
You're answering your question in a way because if you haven't done, you need to do is to sit down as a team of people who are operating your program and think about what are the issues that could possibly happen. Once you identify the issues, then how can we, with the resources we have, solve this? Who in our group is going to be responsible while they're not standing at the door, that everybody knows if there's a problem to be sure that person has the attention because they know the next step, which is to know that they've talked to the local law enforcement officer and they know to expect a call from them. If they call and say, whatever the word is, we need your help, they'll get an immediate response. But having all that in place of who is going to be responsible for those situations instead of waiting, and then look at your resources where you are as a community, who is your local law enforcement officer, and talk to them about and say, who do we call, what is the best number, and be sure that people who have some sense of responsibility know what those issues are, because we get lots of volunteers who come in and out and we can't expect them to know that, but we have a core group of people who have very specific responsibilities. And I know if somebody looks at me and says a particular word that I need to be alerted, that I may need to call law enforcement.
Yes.
And so we have that kind of plan, and it's looking at what your issues might be and then figuring out what are the resources you have that can solve them. And that's where you have the right to expect your Windham County Police Sheriff or your Vermont State Police
That's precisely
to
my
provide you some
question.
support.
Which of those people or someone else would I call if they aren't able to be active or proactive in that situation because they don't have the authority?
Let me give you, go ahead, please.
If I can also add on to this, yes, please do call me, but before you call me, you can also call VAAP, the Vermont Asylum Assistance Project, and that's an organization that has taken off. It's a network of attorneys and other volunteers who work around the state to address these instances when they arise and to make sure that people who are getting detained can get access to an attorney, because one of the unfortunate tactics that that federal agents use is after they've detained somebody is to promptly get them to a different jurisdiction and away from their community and away from any counsel. And so, you know, the sooner that they are able to get connected with volunteers or attorneys with VAAP or Vermont Legal Aid, which in the recent budget we provided for a position for an immigration attorney, getting access to those organizations, or getting the detainee connected to those organizations as soon as possible and reaching out to them is definitely one of the most important things you could do.
Hold on, please. I'm just going to jump in here first. And while what Nader said is true, the first call, if you see something happening in your community that involves immigration, should probably be to migrant justice if you're hoping to get people out on the scene quickly to capture what is happening in that moment. And I see Francie holding up a card here that has a number for that organization. So this is stepping outside of the box of what we're talking about with fair and impartial policing and into a different into a different realm, and I should say I'm not giving this advice as somebody from the Equity and Inclusion Advisory Committee. This is a different hat that I'm wearing at this moment as just a community member. So Migrant Justice does have a response network within our communities that does observe when these things are happening. And I'm sure Francie would be happy to connect with anybody. And I would also suggest, Janice, that you reach out to other organizations that are already setting up these systems, because many organizations, not just food shelves, not just volunteer organizations, but many organizations and businesses have put a lot of thought into this and have built responses that stay within the law, but also allow for documentation and some level of protection. And then secondary, I would call the community asylum assistant. I always screw this one up. Community asylum. No, community is Vermont Asylum. Thank you. I always go to CASP. No, the Vermont Asylum Assistance Project. So, did that answer the question thoroughly?
Mostly, yes.
Okay. All right.
I'm
So-
not looking to have a lot of people come and witness what's happening. There are already going to be 40, 50 people there. I'm looking for, is there a police agency that is going to come and support us or make sure that that person is, or witness that that person isn't being injured?
Call my office and we'll sort it out from there. There are so many partners, and you've heard about some of them, who can be involved. The one thing, a lot of people want to talk about coming to observe, and one of the things we saw in South Burlington was people who came to observe, and then people who were also instigating. And there are groups of people who will come out and instigate on purpose to make that side's story worse. People will play both sides of this game, and I'm not here to say what's right or, well, I'll say what's right and wrong. I'm not here to say whose politics are right or wrong, but rather to say, I have no issue if anyone wants to pull out their little black box or whatever color box that you have and turn on the video camera and record it. Be a bystander, be a witness, because it will have information that I might say, this is a civil immigration matter, I cannot be involved because the fair and impartial policing policy says I can't. But we also have the Vermont Immigration Legal Defense Fund, who now needs to get their attorneys going, and well, let's call them up. And I don't know how to get a hold of them, so I'm going to call Senator Hashim, who says, oh, you need to talk to Mike Pishak. Mike's number is here. And so, like, very quickly, we are working networks. So if you call my office, we're going to start working our network. I might not be able to do anything. My deputies might not be able to do anything, as we've talked about the FIT policy, fair and impartial policing policy. But we'll at least start the chain of communication. We have CASP as a local partner. We have ECDC as a local partner. We have the Department of State as a local partner. Even though it's the federal government, they're a local partner. We have Migrant Justice, No Mas Pali Migra. I mean, we can talk for hours about different people, but they also have similar struggles. What resources do they have to do the things? So happy to be at least a connector to services. I know the state police would also try to do the same thing, and we've worked with them when they can't be the connector for whatever reason. Like, if you call my office and not the state police, that's fine. If you call the state police and they connect you to us, that's fine. If they can handle it, that's fine as well.
Any more questions from the audience?
Hi, I'm Melissa Burdenthal. I'm the Director of Programs for ECDC. So first, I just want to acknowledge, because I think part of what's really happened is that this administration's done a great job of making us distrust everybody, and especially law enforcement. And I can personally say how much our law enforcement in Southern Vermont has really stepped up. From some of the programs that Sheriff Mark Anderson was describing to the different ways that they have outreach to our community to try to make them feel safe, heard, and protected is really outstanding. And I want to make sure that we all know about that, because so much of the news focuses on everything else. That being said, I did want to bring up one point around language. It's not a cure-all. Language is a barrier, and we do have tools that make it easier, but there are still really big problems with our language tools. Even with the fancy language tools that I use on a daily basis, I have had miscommunications. I've had miscommunications with people who I've known for 6 months, and all of a sudden, I can tell that we are not talking the same language, even though we are with the translator. And so if we're going to start using translation tools in law enforcement, I'd like to recommend that there's something written into policy that acknowledges that these are not foolproof, and that there can be misunderstandings, and that perhaps this has gotten escalated because of the translation tool, not because of the situation. Okay.
I really appreciate you saying that. Part of the work that we actually did with the immigrant driver program was to bring in English as a second language professionals and interpreters who are trained to teach. And that's as technical of the language as I can use. But at the end of the day, we brought in people smarter than I am to start saying, how do we talk to people who we're going to be teaching how to drive in the United States with a driver's ed curriculum and with our simulator program. And so we were very intentional on that, which while I love all the technology, there's also there are more reasons than my staff just don't want to spin up as quickly as I'd like them to. But it's certainly an important thing about it. And I appreciate you saying that. Thank you.
I think we have time for one more question from the audience, or maybe we can get two in.
Yeah, hi. Not good with these. Going back to the FIP, and I've been working on this for a while, as some of you know, and I wanted to get back to the fact that I'm going to stand up front here. I can't see everybody. What I've talked with Will Lambeck at Migrant Justice, and I first reviewed the policy to see what I thought was violated in the South Burlington incident. And then, I ran it by him. And so those are sections V, VA, VB, V1 is 6D, sections 5, 6, and 9. And all of those, he believes, and I, from my experience, also believe those are violated. And a brief summary, I'm not going to read all these things, but a brief summary is that under the policy, Vermont law enforcement members do not have the authority to support or assist in federal immigration, law enforcement, and we've talked about this, but I think it's important bringing this up again, including locating, detaining, facilitating the detention of individuals unless there is a formal agreement entered with the governor, which there was not in this case. And I just think this is something that people, and I know everybody here will probably say, as you have earlier, that you would follow the FIP, and I hope you would. But I just wanted to mention those sections, and that Will at Migrant Justice does believe that it was violated that day.
Thank you. There was another hand over here.
Did you have a question?
No, because I was going to ask if they thought they would that they would follow it, but they already said they would follow it. I just thought it was important to go through the sections.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, we hear a lot about due process. Could you please explain due process in any of the immigration issues?
I'm so thankful we have an attorney on the panel.
Senator.
So due process is it almost feels like a quiz for the bar exam, but due process, there's substantive due process and procedural due process. And what this refers to is making sure somebody gets a notice of what crime they're being charged with, and then that they're also able to have their day in court, essentially. And that's the very narrowed down version of what due process is. But just to clarify, you had also added mention about immigration. Can you restate your question one more time? Just what were you asking?
Well, I'm thinking that when people are up in arms about, I don't want to say illegal, but people who are ICE are after, that they don't have due process. That they haven't, they need due process, or, thank you. Or the due process is being denied to people who are, who ICE is trying to get.
Got it. Yes, makes sense. So what I believe that is referring to also kind of goes back to something I had alluded to earlier, which is the idea that, or rather the practice that ICE engages in, where after they detain somebody, they will promptly take them to another jurisdiction. And that doesn't just rip them away from their community and their counsel, but it also makes it extremely difficult for their attorneys to provide them with legal advice, but also to engage in the process of filing a writ of habeas corpus, which is a right afforded to every single person in America. And what that writ of habeas corpus is the ability for any detained individual to say, to have a day in court to say, I disagree with why I'm being detained. I want a justification for it. And if you can't justify it, release me. And what ICE will do, what they did with Ramesa Ozturk, who was arrested in the First Circuit and then brought to the Second Circuit very quickly that same day, her attorneys were filing motions, but they didn't even know that she had been taken to another jurisdiction. And so this strategy does constructively prohibit, or it disrupts due process for an individual to file the writ of habeas corpus, which is one of the oldest legal concepts that we've had long before this country was even established. So I believe that's what that is referring to.
Thank you.
Are we ready for our wrap up? All right. So for each panelist, what is one concrete step either your office or yourself are committed to taking to strengthen community trust with immigrant residents in Windham County? And what do you need from this community to do your job well and equitably? Sheriff Anderson, do we want to start with you?
Sure. No clue. I have not the slightest clue what the step would be. We are doing so much right now. And so what can the community do? Give me feedback. I really appreciate hearing about language and how quickly we can stumble with technology that we're using. I looked up due process on ChatGPT, by the way, and I thought it was a great answer. But really, again, I mean, I'll come back to community time and time again to say, like, I need to hear from you what's going on, and I'll stick around afterwards tonight if you want to connect with me, or we can connect another time. What are ways that we're harming? In fact, one of the times I met Cliff, he was talking about how immigrant community was stopped by some Vermont law enforcement on Route 5 and told me a story. And we started looking into the story, and the story didn't make sense to me procedurally. But if it's happening, we want to know. And so to the same reason of why I need to hear if someone's showing up at the food shelf and has a problem and there's nothing I can do, we also want to understand the story, because we might not be able to solve what's happening right then and there in the moment. But we can have the conversations. We can reach out to our representatives and our senators. We can start having community forums like this to say, what's the right thing? We're not always going to agree, but we all go to town meeting, I assume. And at town meeting, I love the thing the moderator says, which is, we came here and we might not agree, but we're neighbors and we're going to leave as neighbors, and let's not forget that. And they say it better, so I won't steal your thunder too much more. But the point being, I need to hear from you. So I don't know what to do. The world is open canvas for us, and if you have thoughts, please let me know, and we'll do our best.
Dr. Wood?
One of the things I would say is to thank you all for having this tonight as a community, because I really do believe that that's where there is power. One of the things that I've learned over these 5 years trying to learn about sheriffs, and there are 12 sheriffs in Vermont, they are in some ways free agents. They may have responsibility to certain laws, state laws or federal laws, but ask Mark, who does his annual evaluation, he doesn't have there's nobody required to formally evaluate Mark every year. As a college administrator, I find that kind of shocking that you're not held accountable in some formal way. But he's not. And I don't say that lightly. But the good news is he knows that he's accountable to the public, because even though he's been around a long time, he's got to get elected. So we really have, as a community, a great deal of power to influence what we expect him to do. He can talk about how busy he is or how short-staffed he is. I don't care. I do care in one way, but the other way I do care is that we have the right and privilege to tell him what our expectations are and to hold him accountable. And I think he's a really good guy, but I'm not letting him off the hook about things that I think are important, nor should you. If you think there are things that are important, he works for you. And I know that sounds kind of cliche or whatever, but it absolutely is the truth. Because ask for an organizational chart about sheriffs in the state of Vermont, and you will find it shocking what little supervision they have above them. So I'm sorry.
Senator?
Thank you. So briefly, I'll share a conversation I had with the vice chair of my committee, who is a retired sheriff himself. He comes from a very red district, and I know he won't mind that I share this, but you know, there was one day earlier on in the session when we were talking about this, and I was letting him know, you know, what some of the priorities were going to be, and I was talking about some of the immigration-related bills and, you know, some of the federal response bills that we would be working on. And, you know, he said, you know, I don't understand why, you know, we're trying to deal with these topics that, you know, I mean, Vermont is so small and, you know, the federal government doesn't even care about us. You know, it's, why are we spending time doing this? And I like my vice chair very much. He's a great guy, but we do disagree on a lot of things. We disagree well, you know? And you know, the thought that I keep, you know, when I'm working on any legislation in any committee, is the fact that Vermonters have a very strong sense of justice. We might be a very small state. We are a very small state, but Vermonters are very vocal and they care a lot. And again, they have that strong sense of justice. And that's what I carry with me when I'm working on legislation related, especially to this topic. And you know, I'm not going to spend too much time going into the weeds, but you know, a lot of the legislation that we passed, or well, 208 it didn't pass, but you know, there's also S209, another bill that prohibits immigration detainment in a long list of places that are now considered sensitive spaces. Previously, it was prohibited to engage in immigration detention in courthouses. We expanded that to include polling places, educational facilities, places of worship, food pantries, hospitals. I forgot, there's a long list, but I believe that's just about all of, oh, and state and government buildings, that's another one. We also, thank you. This session, we also passed Prop 4, which is the Equal Rights Amendment. You'll be seeing that on the ballot in November. I encourage everybody to vote yes. It's an equal rights amendment that will prohibit government from creating laws that discriminate based on race, national origin, ethnicity, sexual orientation, gender identity, religion, and disability. And we've also created a list of immigration protocols for schools, which will now prohibit schools from collecting and retaining or sharing immigration-related information about students or their families with federal agents. Because the federal government preempts the state from allowing us to cut off communication between law enforcement and federal law enforcement, there's nothing mentioned about schools, and so we are making sure that is prohibited, that communication between schools and federal agents. And that's a snapshot, a small snapshot. I know folks may want to wrap this up here. So those are some of the things that we've worked on, some of the concrete steps that we've taken. And it's my hope to continue that work next session. Assuming I'm reelected, I never want to make any assumptions here. But for the second question, what do I need from the community? Just maintain the communication with me and with other legislators, because I can make assumptions about what my constituents may want me to vote on, but getting that reassurance, hearing from folks that they want me to vote on a certain way on a certain bill, just gives me that reassurance, because it's very easy to start second guessing yourself when it comes to complex legislation, and you start wondering, all right, is this really what folks want? I haven't heard from anybody. Maybe I need to get to more constituent meetings, so that's the long-winded way of saying, just please keep up the communication and let me know what your priorities are, and yeah, thank you.
Sergeant?
So, not to kind of piggyback again off the sheriff, when the sheriff's department isn't covering Putney, obviously the state police is. That being said, we also cover over 20 towns in Windham County and towns in Windsor County as well. It's not often that one of us is at a meeting like this, so it's very easy for community issues to kind of fall through the cracks that Sheriff Anderson might very well be aware of, but that might not get shared to us. So what my part of leaning on the community would be, please either contact the Lieutenant Todd Wilkins at the barracks, any shift supervisor working either night or days. If there's any issues or concerns, please at the very least reach out so we're aware of it. If there's an unfortunate case that we can't do anything, at least we are knowledgeable of it and nothing's not just being completely blown off. I appreciate you allowing me to be here tonight for this. Like I said, I did have a short period of time. I will be taking this back. My view is a little bit different from the sheriff's. Is he obviously has a much bigger worldview in Windham County of what his dreams and aspirations are. Mine is the 4 people plus me working tonight. I look for their safety and the safety of everyone that we will inevitably interact with tonight. But being able to be here and listen to all of you and share that experience has been absolutely beneficial. So that will be my one concrete change to bring back.
Thank you. So I'd like to thank BCTV and, of course, our panelists and also everyone in the audience. But I think Swift has something to say.
Just thank you all for coming. It's amazing to see such a turnout. Take this home with you, digest this, share it with your neighbors, your places of work. We have people from all over Windham County here, so bring this back to your select boards, to your committees and things like that. If you're interested in more we do here in Putney, the Equity Inclusion Advisory Committee, we meet the 4th Thursday at Town Hall and on Zoom, and we're working on all sorts of things right now. Happy to talk about that, and thank you for prioritizing this, and let's give a round of applause. Thank you to everyone. Have a great night, and thanks for coming.